everybody, and welcome back to the Retro Rents Retro Gaming Podcast. It is episode 83, and I am Al.
I'm Nick.
And we have a special guest tonight. We are super pumped. I know if you've seen some of the posts we've made on the Save Point, we've kind of been hinting at this for a bit, but we are super lucky to have composer, musician, musical, as I said tonight, musical badass from all the research I've done. Robert Holmes joining us today. For fans of our show who are into like Sierra, especially a lot of people that listen are people around our age who have played the classics growing up. Gabriel Knight rings a bell. Gabriel Knight obviously rings a bell. And Robert is the composer and wrote the music and producer behind Gabriel Knight, and we'll get into that. But we are so happy to have you here today, Robert. Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, man, thank you so much. And just a quick thank you to Roberta Vaughn over at the Classic Gamers Guild for kind of helping us get connected and get this set up. We really appreciate it. Okay. So, Nick and I, we try to keep this pretty laid back, and I think we'll kind of start towards at least the beginning, because we'd love to get an idea of, especially with somebody of creative talent, kind of what helped, where you came from, what formed, your style or whatever. And so I'm gonna hand this over to Nick and let him ask a few questions, and we'll get rolling.
Yeah,
fire away.
Awesome. So yeah, like I said, we enjoy like what we call the origin story, more or less. Like, how did you get started? Or we'll start, I guess, on the music side. Like, where did you first start getting into music? Either like performing or just like following in general.
Yeah, I was really lucky. I grew up in a little town, Whittier, which was about 20 minutes from Hollywood, and there was something in the water in that town, because a bunch of people that I went to school with all ended up pro. One guy plays with Paul McCartney, one guy plays with Burt Bacharach. A bunch of us went into various musical careers. So it was a really cool community to be a part of. And I played, I started really young, playing in a lot of bands in Orange County and LA and Hollywood. So, that was great experience, playing just about everything, you could possibly do during the 60s and 70s and 80s. And then ended up doing some studio work and post-production, film post-production in LA, and had done that for a while, and found my way to Sierra really on a lark. They actually hired my then wife as creative director, and so I found myself in a little mountain town without a lot to do, and so I decided, well, I guess I'll do some music for them, and it just turned into this great thing, and it was really interesting for me because I had a lot of technology background, and also a lot of musical background. And so both of those things were very valuable at Sierra. And just also my education, which was in film scoring and cinema history, because we had pretty lofty ideas back then that we were actually, making interactive films, which may or may not have been what ended up happening. But yeah, so it was an interesting path, and I had some great experiences coming up through all of that.
That's interesting that you put it as interactive films, because again, I grew up playing those games as they came out, and I think I remember very vividly the first time I played Gabriel Knight. I mean, again, and this is no dig at any other previous Sierra games. I pretty much played their entire catalog growing up, but there was something about the Gabriel Knight score that felt very cinematic. It felt very um, it felt like a step up. Like, and again, a lot of the music they did was phenomenal, but like it might have been, and maybe this is where you can get into some of the technology bit. There was definitely something, at least in that era, in that game, kind of started a more. It felt like a more smart way of like scoring the music. Like and I might be remembering this wrong, but if I'm not, like I remember, like if you're walking out of this one bar or cafe that was there, and you're going towards the park, as you're going to the door, you could kind of hear the trumpets playing. When the Saints go marching in the middle of the field. Um, what was the technology like at that point in time? I know, because I know a lot of y'all had to deal with the technology at the time. There was definitely limitations, and this is something I know we kind of had later. But I'm very curious as to what were your constraints during that very early time of kind of the merging of computer games and music.
Yeah, it was an interesting. I think Jane and I felt like we were right on the cusp of a lot of change and evolution of what was possible technically. When I first started at Sierra a couple of years before Gabriel Knight, I was mainly doing musical conversions of scores that the other guys had done for other games on sound blasters. So it was like or Macs and it was basically editing blips and beeps. So just circumstantially, I think when GK came along, we were right at a time where there were some hints of what might be more possible. There were some ways that, just because of my background, we wanted to push the technology and see if we could do things. And circumstantially, Sierra was also creating a new engine in general that would have a lot of new capabilities. So all of that, and then about halfway through the development of GK1, the Roland Sound Canvas came out, which gave me a lot more flexibility. So it was just really kind of one of those things of, well, we're going to push and see what's possible, and we may fall on our face in a few places, but at least maybe we'll do something new.
Now, you mentioned kind of like the new engine. Like how much does, at least at this time, does the engine for a game play into either the constraints or the power that you're able to put into like a score or the background music for a game?
It was really critical, and especially in a company like Sierra, where there was such an integration between the design, the sort of creative voice of the games and the series, and building the engines to support what they knew the designers were itching to achieve. And especially because you had, somebody like Roberta at the top who was creatively motivated to push the company in those directions and push the development teams in those directions. So all of that was I think one of the strengths that really made Sierra powerful was that really close relationship between the development engine, the development teams, and the creative side of the company. And that's not always true. I've worked at other companies where it's like, cats and dogs, and, producers kind of get in the middle and try to get everybody to the finish line.
That's interesting. Yeah, like we previously interviewed Christy Marks, and she was talking about her time at Sierra, and it really sounds like, even what you're talking about with you and Jan, and pushing the envelope, like feeling you're on the cusp of something. We got the impression that it was like a really unique kind of Wild West environment for y'all, in the sense that, like, there wasn't a book when you came in that said, here's how you do this here, and here's how you do that here. Like, at here being at Sierra, and you kind of were able to, again, work together and forge your own path creatively for you. Like, what was that like? I mean, that must have been really stimulating.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. I think it really was that kind of Wild West, where we felt like we were building the road as we drove. And the great thing was, there was a bunch of really talented people and really smart people. And in general, the spirit within the company was, really collaborative, which had a great impact, I think, on how things evolved. With Jane and I specifically, I have to give Jane the credit for this. She very clearly, I know Christy and some other folks really had worked to help move the company in these directions, but I think Jane really went to Ken Williams strongly and said, look, I want to do something more mature, more ambitious, more
Definitely.
cinematic, all of those things. So the fact that Ken got behind that vision really helped us also, push the technology and push whatever else we needed to make that possible.
Great. So kind of getting a little bit more into, maybe how the sausage is made, so to speak. So you kind of had this, it's like, we want to do this just more mature and cinematic, game. Once they kind of had that vision, like what are you given as kind of a score composer to creating like scenes for the game? Because I think Al mentioned it. Because it seems like you're creating like a lot of stuff for something like Gabriel Knight, where it's like not only like background music, where you're walking into kind of the city center and there's like these blues bands, playing the various what would be background music for like a on an actual movie or something like that, but you're also playing creating the score for the other parts of the game where it's like it's mood setting a mood and a timbre for that. So like what are you given like kind of these scenes or descriptors or even just like kind of early rendition artist renditions of like what would the scene would look like or what's happening?
Yeah, it was really interesting with GK1 because Jane and I really sort of started partnering very early while she was in the process of creating the concept. So we would actually, before we even had a team, we would spend hours just sort of walking around Bass Lake, talking about her vision, talking about the characters, talking about the story, talking about the universe, talking about even specifically, this is the way we want it to be received. This is the way the press is going to write about it. This is, the impact it's going to have. And that kind of manifestation of all of those elements really started at that point, which was very valuable for me as a composer, because by the time I actually started thinking about musical ideas, I knew the entire story. I knew all the characters. I knew the whole arc of where the series was going to go, even after this first episode. And so it was very, easy for me to just have the art directors give me a sketch of a room and say, okay, here's the Getty estate. And I would just, sit at my piano and write to that sketch.
Wow. So like that, I can just imagine like having that kind of partnership really early on. It's almost like from an audio sense, you're writing the game together, and that's really cool. Um, I remember growing up in that era very well. Just to get games that like Gabriel Knight, had a lot of multimedia and were really pushing the hardware to its limits. I very well remember editing my config.sys to get the game to run so it was out of memory.
Yep,
you know,
yep.
um, but I genuinely wonder, you know, the score that you wrote for Gabriel Knight, and I even saw a YouTube video of you playing it on piano. Like, it is so layered and it is so full. Like, even the main theme, you make a piano sound like there's six different instruments playing at once. And I just remember how limiting the hardware was back then. You're talking about an engine, a disk base, and I've talked to Dan. Oh my god, I feel so bad forgetting his last name, but he's working with another game creator, Julia Minamata, making the Crimson Diamond, and he's composing it all on a Roland MT32. And like they'll do sessions where he's showing you how it's done, and I'm looking at that going like that thing is crashing every 10 minutes, and apparently that was just what it did, or at least maybe it was maybe the emulation thing. But like I imagine, what you wanted to do versus what you had to work with must have conflicted. Can you kind of give us a insight or a look into what limitations of the technology at the time that you had to deal with? Because I'm sure there are people listening to this that who didn't grow up in that time don't realize like you had very limited memory, you had very limited hardware to work with. You couldn't just do everything that you might have wanted to do, and I was just wondering what limitations you ran into yourself.
Yeah,
if any.
it was, it was a real challenge. As a creative, I really firmly believe that most, at least for myself, the best creative happens, when I'm really put into a box and I'm really forced to work within certain parameters. And as you said, there were huge limitations. Now, I was also, compared to some of the other, amazing composers at Sierra, some of these guys were genius in terms of MIDI and early MIDI implementation and how to manipulate that. I sort of came from the other end of the spectrum, having had a rock and roll and a studio career. I was actually kind of stubborn. I was like, hey, this is the way I make music, and I'm going to force it. I'm going to force it into this little machine, which was very kind of a arrogant approach, I guess. But I think that had some impact on me, kind of asking more out of the technology just because I was that stubborn. And I was that ignorant. I had to do it that way because I really wasn't that great with MIDI and with the technology. But yeah, what I tried to do in general, and especially it was interesting on GK1 because I had both roles, as you mentioned, the producer and the composer. So I would spend the first half of my day as the producer, working with the team and working on schedules and budgets and all that. And then I'd spend the second half of the day, I'd turn around and I had my piano behind my desk and I'd, write music all afternoon. But what I would do is I tried not to place limitations on the music in the original version. I would just write it the way I wanted to hear it. And then as I got to each layer of the technology and, each version of how a game goes out and the technology, the hardware that it's going to be played on, you kind of had to take one more step down, in terms of what was possible. Right. But I always wanted to start as rich as possible and then just whittle it down as needed.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Nick, please.
Just maybe back up a little bit. Yeah. So like, I guess what were your roles as kind of the more the producer side? Kind of, obviously, it seems like you were wearing two hats. So could you, kind of explain what happened as a producer in general for the game?
Yeah, and I'll just fill this. I was gonna say I'm a project manager in my day job, and it sounds an awful lot like that. I'm very curious.
It's very similar, and in the early days of gaming, it was actually very similar to a film producer. It's like you had the ultimate responsibility for the project. You were the conduit between the team and management. You owned the budget. You owned the schedule. You were in charge of the health and feeding of the team, hiring, firing, all of that good stuff. If it went well and the game made money, you were a great producer. If it didn't go well and it ran over budget, you had an issue. But yeah, it was good for me because I could use both sides of my brain. And it kind of gave me ways to develop in both directions.
God, I can't even imagine that. Like that just blows my mind in the sense that dealing with that for half of your day, and well, I guess it's not too out of the park, but like that's kudos to you. Wrangling all that for the first half of the day, and then you're sitting down writing music, which I'm sure is fun, but like that can be draining. And just being able to wear those two hats, and especially like I would say today, probably, especially, you would never hear of that at a game company. I think it's just one of the things, it sounds to me, that made, at that point in time, working at a company like Sierra super unique, where it's like you did get to use both halves of your brain and bring that together. That's really wild. And I guess kind of taking the next step here. So now, like, you've made Gabriel Knight 1. It's a great, it's a good success for sure. To where Sierra, is down for making the next game. And at this point, Gabriel Knight 2 comes along, and this was definitely at the peak of, at the time, what were full motion video adventure games, because the CD-ROM was more widely adapted. More people were able to have one. And so game designers, creators, producers were able to do a lot more with the hardware than they could before. And so the Gabriel Knight series for this specific game took a very cinematic approach and full motion video for scenes, and you were controlling what looked like an actor in a movie. And that was the first thing I thought of when, Robert, when you were saying how you wanted the interactive, an interactive movie, which was what these were. And so now you're sitting in the seat and you're writing the music. And I wonder, your approach with Gabriel Knight 1 of writing it how you wanted to hear it, how did that help you at Gabriel Knight 2, where it's like, okay, well, now you got the orchestra. Rock on.
Yeah, it was interesting. GK2 was a really interesting time because Jane and I had gone to Europe. We'd spent a lot of time researching the story and researching Wagner and Ludwig. And I even went to Wagner's grave and apologized for what I was about to do. And we watched a lot of opera in Vienna. I mean, it was all really wonderful fuel. So then we got back to California. We started on the game, and we were a few months in, and it's kind of ironic given that I had this film background. I got an offer for a different job up in Seattle, working with Paul Allen and the musician Sting, which I couldn't really say no to.
And are we talking Paul Allen, like Microsoft Paul Allen?
Yeah.
Holy crap! All right, continue.
So yeah, but he had a new company he was starting called Starwave, where he basically went out and found all the artists that he was passionate about, people like Sting and Peter Gabriel and Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg, and he basically set up teams to work with all of these artists and said, okay, you've got 2 years, go follow Sting around and make cool content, and you have a blank check. So
wow. So
the dynamic was kind of interesting because Jane and I had done a lot of development and prep, and I was really excited about what I knew GK2 was going to be and the vision she had for that, but I couldn't say no to this job, so I took that job and left Sierra. They continued with the development of GK2, obviously, and then about 2/3 of the way through, I had a 2-week vacation, and I used that time to write the music for GK2, and I did it in my home studio.
Oh, wow.
So it was a very different dynamic than GK1. And it was great because at that point, as you mentioned, again, sort of going back to the Wild West, we kind of said, hey, we don't care if the users have to load 57 CDs. We're going to do what we want to do,
Yeah.
And so it had that great spirit, and so it was cool from a musical perspective because I could do it as an actual audio. I could record it and produce it the way I wanted to hear it.
Yeah.
And know that it would be heard that way in general. And then, of course, came this little thing where Jane said, hey, could you write me an opera? And
that's what I was getting at. I wanted to know if you wrote that opera. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So and that was a real trip, you know. My buddy, who was another great Sierra composer, Jay Usher, came up to Seattle to help me out because he was very gifted as a scorer and notation guy, and we knew we were going to be working with opera singers, and you just, you know, they won't do anything if it's not on the paper.
For
So,
sure.
so that was a really interesting experience, you know, working with the Seattle Opera and then shooting the opera at the Moore Theater in Seattle.
Did you get to interact with any of the cast? 'Cause I can't remember his name now, but the villain in Gabriel Knight 2 is a pretty famous actor, if he's the one I'm thinking, or I'm probably getting this wrong. Actually, I probably shouldn't even ask this question because I purposely annoy my wife with, "Is that Burt Reynolds?" in every other movie, and she hits me. Um, but no,
Yeah,
like, did you interact with any of that cast?
yeah, you know, all of the GKs, we were so lucky to get amazing cast, and you know, going back to GK1, where we had, you know,
Oh
Tim
yeah.
Curry and Mark Hamill and Peter Dorn and
Oh
Leah
yeah.
Remini, you know, all of these people were like, it was like, you know, to be in a computer game was the big cool thing.
Oh man.
So, you know, we had these wonderful experiences of, you know, recording with Tim for a couple of days or recording with Mark. And same thing with GK2, you know, they had a great cast. We had a great crew. Um, so we were just really fortunate all the way around with that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's super cool, and it was that was one of my lingering questions from the time I played Gabriel Knight 2 was like the opera scene was one of my favorites because obviously it's a uh, very strong beat of the climax of that game, and you know, I spoiler alert, we're beyond 20 years now. Um, um, you know, it's part of the story of the game is they find a long lost Wagnerian opera, and they perform it in the game, and like I thought it was awesome. Like I thought it was believable. Like it obviously shows you did a ton of research from a musical standpoint, and um, I don't know. I thought I had a
Well,
question here, but
it
it's
was,
just
you know, it was so much fun to do because,
yeah.
you know, at the time, you know, talking about technology at the time, sampling was very new, and mainly the only company that was doing it at all was a company called Kurzweil, who were making keyboards that were samplers. And you know what I did is I got one of these keyboards and I just loaded it with tons of trombones. You know, so it was hysterical. You know, I'd have like 200 trombones, and because that was my perception as a rock and roll guy, that was my perception of Wagner. Was, you know, that he
Just
loved
all
trombone.
that brass, yeah.
Yeah.
All that breath.
So you know, it was kind of a, I guess a one big paintbrush, and I'm sure not a lot of real, you know, studied people who really know Wagner would probably say, well, you know, maybe not quite, but it was a blast to do, and you know, it's still cool. There's still people out there, you know, restoring the footage and posting it and you know, playing the music. So it means a lot that it obviously worked.
Yeah, it still gets all that playtime, huh?
Yeah.
So after kind of GK 2 and 3, the next game you were associated with was called Gray Matter. It's just very much I felt a more subdued score when listening to it. But it's at least, you know, within gaming, the first time we see Scarlet Furies, which is a band that you're part of, right?
Yep. Yeah. And again, just sort of happy circumstances. You know, Jane and I were working on the game together at the same time that I was developing that band with my daughter Raleigh, and And that band was kind of an accident. She was working on an acting career and had some showcases in Los Angeles and needed a band. And so she said, can you put a band together for me, Dad? So I called a bunch of my old high school buddies who I hadn't seen for 20 years. And we rehearsed with her for a couple of weeks, and we did this first showcase, and it went over so well. That became the Scarlet Furies, and we ended up touring and doing albums for 6 years. So it was just one of those happy accidents, and it happened to all go on at the same time that Gray Matter was being developed. And we just kind of said, hey, it would be cool to, put some Scarlet Furies in the game. Thinking, well, maybe it'll work. We're not sure. It's kind of an odd texture to put in an adventure game. But people seem to really, latch onto it, and we got a lot of great feedback, and sounded like people enjoyed it.
Yeah, it really kind of fit that kind of almost noir feel I think the game was trying to go for.
Yeah, that's interesting. We used to describe the Furies as Gothic, sort of Southern Gothic roots, and that it's funny because obviously Gray Matter takes place in England, so it's kind of a weird combination. Yeah. But I guess
it works though. It works.
But again, it's something that we could only do because the technology had gotten to the place where we could just provide audio, and we didn't really have to worry about MIDI issues.
How far we've come. Yeah, and I have to say, I've been listening to Safe and Arms all day. Like it's funny. I'd played Gray Matter when it came out, and I knew, this is by Jensen and Gabriel Knight. And then I find out, as we're doing the research and the deep dive, like, oh wait, Robert's making the music for this. He made the music for this, and it's It has a sound to me like I was describing it to a friend who's a fan of the Gabriel Knight series. I was pointing to Gray Matter, and I said the same composer did the music for this one, and I'm like, it almost feels like Southern Celtic-y. Like I couldn't, but it's fantastic. And like what I think is so cool, like I was watching the YouTube video for Sam's theme. That y'all have up for Scarlet Furies. And the comments are just awesome. Like, you could tell there were people that really connected with the game because they connected through the music. And, as somebody who creates things, how does it feel knowing that, it's been some years since Gray Matter came out, and, like, people are still connecting with that song, connecting with the game mainly because of that song. And, that's the thing I got out of the comments was, they enjoyed the game, but this song just draws them back. Like, how does that feel as a creative artist, knowing that, almost 10 years on, like, that torch still burns?
It's so rewarding. And, as you guys know, we're kind of currently right in the middle of this Kickstarter for a new album of GK style themes. And we thought, we'll kind of jump out there and see if people are interested in having this done. And it's been so great to get the feedback and see so many people, still, loving that music. I had done an album a few years ago called A Simple Refrain, where I had this wonderful buddy piano player who took a lot of the old GK and Gray Matter music and just did wonderful piano versions. And it was great to see the response to that as well. So, as a writer, it's just so gratifying to know that you're giving somebody that kind of pleasure and that it means something to them, and that you're helping. Hopefully, it's a positive contribution. And I have to say, with a lot of the Fury stuff, and especially with Safe in Arms, that song, the heart of that song, the spirit of that, that's Raleigh, and that's her music coming forward, her voice, her words, and I'm just really proud of that and proud of her.
That's so cool. Like, I have very young children of my own. I started kind of late in life in that regard, but like, I used to be in a band. Like, I don't know, it's not about me, but like, I can imagine as a father, like, that's got to be amazing. And she's incredibly talented. The videos that I've seen that y'all have made as the Scarlet Furies, like, the music's great, the stage presence is awesome. Like, that's got to be pretty cool. Just kind of seeing that, like, something in that creative vein that exists in you, continues, through your daughter, who's also incredibly talented. Like, uh, that's just got to be
Yeah,
really.
it was the best of both worlds for me because here I'm, the rest of the guys in the band are all guys I grew up with who I had disconnected from for 20 years.
How great
We
is that?
we reconnect, and it's like
Oh,
we never stopped playing together, and and it just happens to really click with her and what she wanted to do musically, and so to get up on a stage with all of that and be surrounded by just the love and the history of that. And especially there were times where we would play shows where we'd be opening for some of our musical heroes, like Leon Russell or the Zombies or you know Jimmy Messina or something. And it was
oh,
just so weird because it was like you're just surrounded by this amazing experience. So
oh,
yeah, it was a real blessing, something I'm really proud of.
that's so cool. I guess, Nick, we'll wait till my daughter gets a little older, and then we'll all get back together. And she'll do she'll
Reunion
do
tour.
she'll do way better than I ever did. No, that's really cool though. I mean, you know, I always get so fascinated looking at the creative side of things, but yeah, no, actually, Nick, I'll let you take this one. I like where you're going with what you wanted to ask here, so I don't mean to interrupt, but that's really cool, man. I appreciate you sharing that, Robert. That's
Thank
that's
you.
so cool.
Yeah. So yeah, after Gray Matter, we had Moebius. Again, another in the game in the same vein, and kind of creative people behind it as well. And this, obviously shifts to a more driving, kind of almost an adventure sound. And it sounded like it had a lot more, I say, live instrumentation than the previous titles. Was this again kind of driven more by that creative freedom, or just like you had technical freedom at this point? As the technology has now progressed at this point.
Well, it's really funny. I mean, you could look at all of the games that Jane and I have been involved in, and there is a direct relationship with the stuff that we're digesting. Whether it's movies we like or a TV series we're really into or a book. So with Mobius, we had just spent a couple of years as really big fans of the Sherlock Holmes series, and so we
You talking about the games?
yeah. Oh no, we're talking about the show.
Okay, the
With
show. Okay,
um,
Jeremy Brett,
because
or no? I'm sorry, you're thinking
with
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch, yeah,
Yeah.
and I've always been a big fan of the Bond movies and all of that
Oh
too.
yeah.
So when Jane, well, we did the Pinkerton Road thing, and we actually asked the contributors and the people who signed up to pledge to vote, and we thought that they would vote for Gray Matter too, and instead they
Right.
voted for Mobius. So, so we're like, oh, okay. Um, uh,
All right.
I kind of looked at it as doing a Bond movie, and that's. I mean,
Mm.
if you listen to the main theme of Mobius, it's a total Bond movie ripoff.
It did have that tone. I was like, it's like can't be that's what they're going for, is it?
It's a good
Um,
tip of the hat, isn't it?
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But that was an interesting time. We had done the Pinkerton Road thing, and got great support by doing that. But we kind of bit off a big challenge. We were doing 3 games at once. We did
Oh wow.
Mobius. We did the remake of GK1 at the same time, And then we also did a kids game called Lola and Lucy's Big Adventure, which was based on our bulldogs. so
Oh,
it's
that's awesome.
very schizophrenic, you know. But you know, we were proud. We were actually one of the few developers who kind of went into the Kickstarter world early. You know,
Yeah, y'all were there early on. I remember that.
And we, you know, frankly, we were one of the only ones who actually delivered on what we said we were going to do, and did it in the time frame we said we were going to do it. So,
speaking of personal financial experience, I can verify that.
You know, not that we didn't have to kind of put some of our own money in to help it along, but
sure.
You know, it ended up, you know, yes, there are compromises in those games. There had to be. You know, we were working with stupid small budgets, but we were, you know, still fairly happy with the way stuff came out.
Yeah. So all right. So that's a good follow up there. Then so it was like with this, you know, you're back in the box, as you say, with a different kind of limitation. Now the technology is there, and you know, vision wise, you could do whatever you wanted. You know, as far like technology wasn't limiting you. And you bring up a really interesting point with like Kickstarters and fan funded stuff. You know, obviously, for those who don't know, making games are extremely expensive, especially today. But like back in the Sierra days, like that was the first time you started hearing of games having like a multi-million-dollar budget. Like when you get to like the film acted games and stuff. Unless I'm speaking out of turn there.
No, you're right. You're right.
Yeah,
and you know, we used to laugh because kind of every year, you know, the teams and the designers would have to go in and pitch Ken Williams on their ideas, and you know, we'd go in and we'd ask for these what we thought were just outrageous budgets, and and you know, we'd about fall over if Ken was into an idea. He'd just say, "Okay, yeah, good, do it," you know. So,
God.
But yeah, it's, and you know, those budgets now, you know, are minuscule compared to what the games have nowadays, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, it was interesting when we did, you know, when we did Moebius and the GK1 remake. The remake was actually more of a constraint because
really,
yeah, it was very weird. Trying to think the best way to describe this. It's kind of like you had to pray musically. You had to pray to two gods. One, you had to carry forward and honor what this sort of beloved music from the original version that, you know, people are very sensitive about. Oh, you know, he didn't do that right, or he didn't do this. And then on the other hand, it's a remake, so they expect it to be somehow better and different. So it's like, where do you draw that line? You know, how do you improve the quality and you know, make something that seems like it's an improvement, but on the other hand carries the spirit and is reverent of the original. And you know, I think candidly, I think the reception to the remake in general was a little mixed because of that, because some people were like, you know, it lost the spirit when it wasn't the same as the original version technically. And I can understand that.
Yeah, it's hard to it's hard to explain. Like, you know, I'm a huge fan of the original, and like I'm one of those weird people. Like I love anyone's attempt at a remake. Like, you know, anyone that feels that inspired, that wants to try to create something, not necessarily do it better, but like, you know, try to do it in a more, you know, it's like colorizing black and white film.
Yeah, exactly.
Just, you know, it's the best way I can put it. And yes, it brings further some details, but there's just something about, you know, the mood, the presentation, everything with the limitations that the technology, I think at the time, you know, offers, where it's just like, no, that's really something special. I think, yeah, I in a way, it's so interesting. I didn't realize you were part of the remake score. It's just I must have missed that, but it's, to me, it's like I'm not even kidding you. When that came out, one of my first thoughts was, I'm rooting for the voice acting cast and the composer, because they have an impossible job.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really true. It's like, how could you improve on the first one for what it was, and it was really odd for me musically because, I mean, literally, I know this sounds stupid, but, I sat down and listened to the original soundtrack and I thought, I have no idea what I did there. I have no idea how to play that.
That's not weird at all.
I literally had to go back and learn that stuff the same way I would learn anybody else's music, and it was hilarious because, I'd figure out something I did and I'd think, wow, that's really good. I have no idea how to do that now.
Yeah, so I mean, like in putting together, did you have anything left over from the originals, or was it just simply it was just coded in and just kind of lost with time, so to speak?
Yeah, it was kind of. There were a few of the tracks that I had always kind of stayed aware of and always thought, oh, if I ever get to redo this, I'm going to change
Right.
this or I'm going to change that. But then there were some of the tracks I'd totally forgotten about. It was probably convenient that I did, but it was a really interesting experience to sort of, imitate yourself successfully.
I love that. Again, when I realized that fact prior to our interview, I'm like, I can't remember what I did 1 decade ago, much less more than that. And, coming back, like, that had to be such a surreal experience. Like, I love that you touched on that, because, like, there's there are musical artists out there that they write something and they may not play it again for years, and even just picking that up again, you're thinking to yourself, like, wow, I did that. I've always wondered what that was like, and that's so interesting to me that, like, you're looking at this years later, and maybe for people listening, it's like, oh, get the sheet music. It's like, no, when you create music, it's like, or anything really, like, it's a part of what you are at that point in time, and the experiences that you have, and the things that maybe things that you're dealing with or going through, but whatever you create at that point in time is very uniquely yourself. And especially if, like, you're going back and looking at a whole body of work like you did, Robert, like, that has to be really surreal.
Well, it was even weirder with GK1 because we were under such a crazy schedule on GK1, and as I talked about, I kind of had this split role, so I didn't have a lot of time on the music, and so I actually, a lot of those musical themes are based on little tidbits that I had sitting around, since I was 17,
Wow.
that I had recorded on a little cassette somewhere, and then I built something out of them. So it was even weirder to go back and relearn this stuff because it's like, oh God, I remember writing that, when I was 14.
Wow. God, I can't even imagine that. That's so cool. Like, it's like almost three, not like three phases of life in one soundtrack. It's like where I was to where I am now to where I will be then. Like, that's wild. That is so wild. I don't even think that happens very often. But no, that's really cool. Thank you again. That
Sure.
kind of
Well, and it was all of the GK stuff. Also, for me, musically, it was actually pretty challenging because, in general, I'm a guitarist and not really a pianist. Yeah, I'm a guitar player who plays a little piano. So the fact that I, in general, had to write most of the music on piano, really stretched me and in a good way, obviously was a good challenge.
Wow.
But when I go back to try and learn some of it, it's like, oh God, I have to think like a piano player.
I've watched you play that main theme on YouTube, and I'm a guitarist that took piano lessons back in my day. You can play piano too. It's cool. That is wild to me. That again, like it's just there. And again, I say this with no snark or anything, but there really is kind of a difference between a musician, not a musician and a composer, but like the fact that you basically arrange symphonic scores for these games in a time where I would say it was the most layered in a computer game. We're talking GK1, but again, GK2, you wrote a freaking opera, or at least part of one. like
well, ignorance is bliss, right?
That is so
like I didn't know. It's funny because I have friends who are like seriously classically trained, and they'll listen to something and they'll be like, a real instrument cannot do that, or a real string section will not do that. And I just kind of say, well, fuck it, I did it. It's like that was actually for me one of the fun things about doing, as you said, all the layered stuff was that if I could hear it in my head, I could pretty much do it, which was fun.
That's awesome. Let me just see here. No, that really threw me for a loop. I'd like to again. We do the origin story and stuff. I would love to kind of fast forward to today, and you talked about it earlier, but as part of that, like, what are you working on today? And please, let's talk about your Kickstarter. I want to hear about that sequel. Robert's project Kickstarter is called Sequel. It is a Gabriel Knight inspired, kind of game music composition, if I understand correctly. I will be backing it very shortly, but I just want to get the message out that, like, this is something really cool and new, but is there anything else you're working on before we get to that that you'd love to shine a light on? Like, what you doing nowadays?
Yeah, the last few years I've actually been doing more producing as a record producer. I did a lot of that with the Scarlet Furies, and I really enjoyed that. And I did that with some folks called the Brothers Four, who are really legendary folk artists from the 1960s, and it was a huge thrill for me because I was a total fan when I was a kid. These guys, they had Grammys, Oscars, all their stuff was, they did soundtracks for movies. They played for JFK. Huge historic folk act. It was really cool. What happened was I did a cover of one of their tunes, and I posted it just for kicks because I love to do covers with friends when we have some time. And I put it up, and about 3 days later, I got this email from the leader of the Brothers Four, and he was like, "Hey, we love what you did. Do you want to do an album together?" And it turned into this just beautiful friendship and relationship, and something I'm really proud of, the way the album came out.
That is so awesome. And that does happen. I mean, we never made an album, but we got to actually go to. That just really brought back a memory. When we did have a band, Nick was in my band, and
cool.
I did a cover of a song from a band in the '90s called Sublime. Did a cover of a song called Saw Red. And it was an acoustic version of that, and we had posted it on MySpace. And that got us, the drummer of the band, Bud Gaw, sent us a message that turned into one thing, went to another, started with an interview, and then all of a sudden we were in the friends and family section at one of their concerts
Nice,
in New York.
nice. Yeah, that's very cool.
But
Oh yeah, and it's a
covers are
big,
good.
and it's a huge thrill, to
It's awesome.
be, especially to be, sitting and mixing an album with somebody who you idolized as a kid.
I can't even imagine that.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah.
gotta be awesome. That is so.
So I guess, getting back to your question, I've been doing more of that recently. But what happened was Jane and I actually, we were living on this farm in Pennsylvania, which was a whole different podcast, probably.
I live in Pennsylvania.
Do you really?
Yeah, we both are. Yeah.
I do.
Oh,
Yeah,
well, we were in Mountjoy, Pennsylvania, in Lancaster County.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And
All
we
right.
had this farm that was built in 1732, and all these. We had cows and chickens and pigs, and it was just a wonderful sort of 10 years of a very weird experience for a couple of city kids. But just an amazing, especially West Coast. It was just a real interesting, vibrant experience. We decided, we really miss family, so we decided to move back here to the West Coast. And so I was resetting up my studio, and I got some of the gear that I had used on GKs, and I was just playing around. And you know how it is with gear. Some of the gear, it just leads you in certain ways, And suddenly I was writing very GK-ish kind of stuff again, and I thought, wow, maybe there's more of this that needs to come out. So that's kind of where we headed toward the Kickstarter.
All right. Now you're getting into, and this always fascinates me because, you're someone that grew up in the LA scene, or just, we don't even have to call it the LA scene. We'll call it something that a lot of people listening to this probably won't understand. It's called the before the internet scene, where it's
before electricity almost.
Okay, wait a minute. No. But you bring up a really interesting thing, and I've talked to a few people that we've interviewed about this, and you're somebody that has absolutely kind of witnessed the evolution of the delivery of music and being able to reach the people that want to hear what you're creating. And I'd love to get your thoughts. Like, you just started this Kickstarter. For everybody listening, sequel is on Kickstarter. We'll have the link in the show notes. And I think it's going to the end of December. Am I right about that?
Yeah, correct. December 31. And, we were fortunate. We funded very quickly, like in 5 days.
Okay.
But we're really hoping, to reach some stretch goals and it allow us to do much more in terms of the process for the album. And so, yeah, we're excited about it and hoping that people will help us out and be a part of it.
Okay, so for the 50 or so people listening right now, no. But if you wanted to give me a good New Year's Eve birthday present, I will put the link in our show notes. And no, seriously, I'm really excited about this project. Like for one thing, Kickstarter is to me it's an amazing thing, and it's where really if you have a good idea if you have a good idea, and especially if you have an audience that is waiting for it, like it offers a lot of opportunity. And you funded this in 5 days, you said, right?
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
the fans did, thankfully.
I'm sorry. Yes, you're absolutely right. The fans funded this in 5 days, and that is really, really wild. How does that feel as a creative artist? Compared to, again, going back to where I don't even know how people sold music. Not even talking before the internet, just in the music industry, just to get noticed. Because again, like there was no YouTube, there was no, I mean, obviously there was no YouTube, there was no internet, but like you had to be at the right place at the right
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
How is that different now, do you think?
Well, it was so different. You would, I'll talk about a specific kind of band. I remember I had a band, this was kind of like in the late 70s, very sort of power popish, very commercial. Um, it was a great band. We had a bunch of great songs. We played a lot. And that was a big part of it. You would play anywhere you could play, as many times a
Sure.
week as you could. We were fortunate. We could play places like the Whiskey a Go Go or Starwood
You
or
played at the Whiskey?
oh yeah, we played the Whiskey all the time. And
Oh my God.
uh, the funny thing is, going back again to the Scarlet Furies, then years later, the Scarlet Furies played at the Whiskey, and that was such a trip, to do that
Oh
with my
man,
daughter. It's like,
that's so cool.
yeah, but back then the whole thing was you would play and play and play. You try and save up your money to make a demo. You'd go into
Yeah,
recording studios and pay $300 an hour. Try and get your songs down, then try and figure out a way to get your tapes in the hands of somebody who mattered, which
yeah,
was utterly impossible. There were like 8 record companies, and they all had brick walls all the way around. You know, so you would end up having to be very political, very
yeah.
networked, play that game. Eventually, you might get under contract. We were lucky; we got under contract. We ended up, in some of the top studios, working with amazing people. Um,
Sure.
and even then, you could create unbelievable product, and it's still, because maybe 20 things got added at any given month, in terms of what radio would play. And if you weren't
Right.
one of those 20 things, didn't matter how good it was, it just disappeared. So it was a very weird time, but it was a lot of fun, to do all that touring and all that recording, and sort of be a part of the heyday of the music industry. It was very decadent, and I'm lucky I survived. But
Oh, that's just wild. Like, I mean, just from a relational standpoint, we were when we were playing, it was kind of right before YouTube was real easy to access. It was kind of there, but it really was still, it was like a half in, half out thing. And I just think that is so wild nowadays, where it's like, and it's one of the greatest things. Like I look at the world that is today, and like, yeah, it's very easy to like get kind of doom and gloomish, but it's like the opportunity that is there. It's like if you have a cool thing, the only difference is maybe today it lasts 15 minutes, but
yeah,
like, you know, it's just really wild that, and I look at your project with sequel, and I love that you're able to reach the audience that wants to hear it, and not only that, it's the audience that loved it in the early 90s. And you know we're talking years later, and you start up this Kickstarter, and the idea just floats, and there are people that will just say, you know what, I want to hear more of that. And they're, I just, that's such a tip of the hat to you. I think that is super cool. And
well,
yeah,
you're right that that sort of the ability of the technology to connect us all now, is so powerful. And it's really interesting with something like my music, for whatever reason. I think because a lot of that music was very emotional and very
absolutely.
sort of dynamic in those ways. It's actually always sort of been more valued or popular with European audiences, and I still I get a lot of great
So cool.
feedback and interest from people in Europe. who just, really connect to the dramatic nature of the music. Whereas, a lot of people here in the States might consider it kind of schmaltzy. But so that's very cool to be able to do that in real time. I mean, I had an email this morning from a guy in Greece. It's like,
Wow.
hey, I just played this game for the first time and I loved your music. It's just like so cool. So yeah, but it is a double-edged sword. It was very weird back in the heyday of the industry. You had these huge gateways, and if you didn't get through that gateway, the music didn't get heard. But conversely, once you did get through that gateway, those companies would pour millions to indoctrinate the public with your music, either through tours or radio, so it was a very powerful machine. So that's kind of lacking these days. It's like, if you can't inherently stand out on YouTube for some reason, good luck.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird when you look at it where it's like, I've friends with musicians, and it's and people, especially, when you talk about the old days, it was like, yeah, and it's like, if I could just get my music heard, it's like, well, now you have the alley to do that, and you can get your music heard by anybody or whatever you're doing. And I think it's kind of the failing of technology today is that, in a sense, something crazy has to happen with it or something for it to go viral. And to me, it's like, it's funny. What I thought was so cool, when we started looking at our, not well, like when we were setting up this interview, I was like, Scarlet Furies, who's the Scarlet Furies? And then, like, I looked into that and I'm like, this is great, like, the music's awesome. And then I realized, oh, like, you're in that band. and like, but to me, I just, there's something really special with the fact that you can still connect with people from decades ago that just love the work that you've done. And I guess I would ask you, we're years on now. If there is something, if you could reach back to your rock and roll guitar persona as you were, we'll say, in your teen years, wanting to break into this craft, assuming you didn't break in at 12, which is totally possible. So before you broke in, whether it's 8, 12, 16, 20, whenever, that you could tell the aspiring you or aspiring composers now that would love to get into this industry, would you have anything you'd suggest or advice to those people based on just the success you've had or whatever?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. That God knows I've asked, when I've met people that I idolized or you really looked up to, and I would ask that same question. And for me, it's what I've learned. I mean, I've had some amazing experiences. I feel really proud and satisfied with a lot of the work that I've done. There's also stuff I'm disappointed with that I wasn't happy with, or that I thought was great, and it totally tanked. So you learn from all of that. But the one thing that I'm kind of finding still true and even more true is that I think music that is made with a lot of spirit in it, with either a lot of joy or a lot of sadness or a lot of emotion or a lot of legitimate sort of connection to the spiritual world. If that's baked into the music, that's what communicates. That's what comes across. I mean, you talk about Safe in Arms. That's a very, very simple song, but what it is, it's packed with emotion. Beautiful. And the spirit that's in that song is what comes across, and I hear over and over people responding to that. And so to me, what I've seen is that if you do any kind of music and you're able to successfully sort of inject it with legitimate spiritual sort of energy, that has a lot of validity and a lot of horsepower to it.
Damn. I could say that the same would probably be true for any creative pursuit, and for anyone listening. I think if there's a root of anything of what makes anything good, doesn't necessarily mean that you'll end up famous, but like, man, you pour your heart into something and it can last, and that is awesome. Robert, this has been an amazing journey. I just, for myself, I want to say thank you for showing up. I want to promote and push sequel because I really want a copy of this.
Well,
to that reason.
I so appreciate you guys having me here, and the questions have been great. It's been a great conversation, and I'm extremely fortunate, and I'm very aware of it, that I'm going to be able to spend a lot of next year doing that album, and hopefully putting a lot of love into that, trying to do that music justice. And so I'm very thankful to the people supporting me for that.
Well, I will tell you that if you are ever doing anything else that you want to come on here, sequel or afterwards, we would love to have you. This has been a wonderful, wonderful chat, and I really always appreciate especially the people that can really give us and our listeners a peek into the creative process. And you've really gotten to experience this industry from a very early time, specifically talking on the gaming industry. And you are definitely somebody who influenced where that industry went. And I really appreciate your time and just want to say thank you very much. And if you ever have any project that you want to come on and talk about, we'd love to get in touch with you. And,
thanks so much.
Anytime.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, absolute treat.
Thank you. Well, part of all of this, I mean, Jane and I still hope that there are more games in our future together, and that there will be some opportunities.
Me too.
I would look so forward to that.
Well, this all is kind of a toe in the water in that direction. But yeah, we're very appreciative when folks like you give us an opportunity to sort of stick our heads up and do a little promotion and talking. So thank you very much.
Well, I'll just say, you and Jane keep making them, and I'll keep playing them.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Robert.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.